artificial consciousness or what is the difference between two of them? Artificial consciousness and AI consciousness.
I guess the artificial consciousness is maybe like a more general term than AI consciousness. So there might be, I guess, other forms of synthetic consciousness which do not use like learning, artificial intelligence, that kind of thing.
So if given that I don't know much about your project and how you're working with that, so it will be nice if you can give me a brief about it, or what is it actually going on, or how are you perceiving it, and what are the points of moral and ethics? Because when I read the description or something, I found it very interesting. That is why I joined it.
Yeah, what we talk about is not exactly how it will actually be implemented, because that's like a very big open question. But we talk about more like the sort of ethical consequences if it were to happen. If somebody actually ends up succeeding in building an AI that's conscious. And we mostly look at this 2D framework, which was like if you imagine like a 2x2 grid. So the two axes are, the first axis is like a metaphysical axis, like are AIs conscious or not? And the second axis is the epistemic axis, where the question is, do people believe that AI is conscious or not? So you get 4 different scenarios from that, like the true positive, false positive, true negative, and false negative. And there's different like risks associated with that. And that's kind of like the backbone of our exploration.
Well, I have been working in this criteria in general, like making a general abstraction of these kind of confusion metrics. I can share some things about that to you later on. Basically, how in general as per human design of human mind and as per design of societies, in general the societies are distributed in a Gaussian distribution, where majority part of the people are either in false positive or true negatives, and rest and very minorities are in the true positives and true negatives. I don't know how to put it, but I will send you a video. And like in that video, I was basically applying the same kind of logic for emotion and logic. How does that work within humans? But that I have now abstracted that logic for a general concept. Like it's general 3 set of thing. One is that confusion matrix, like Nash equilibrium kind of thing. One is the state flow. How does a human or a society in general flows from one state to other? And after that, how is that distributed in a society or within a human's life? And I have still not formalized it very much, that whole process of abstraction, because after I made it, I got busy into my other research thing and also in my college, so I left that. But I have applied it to emotion and logic, to action and outcomes, to input and outputs. Like same kind of abstracted logic can be applied and implemented in a lot of ways, using, like, if you just fit 2 variables into that, and it will give you set of logic. So I'm working on that, and I think that can work here as well. But what I can understand with you is you're working more on the side of ethics of AI, right? Like what are the ethical systems that humans should follow to work with AI, with conscious AI, right? Yeah. So,
yeah, I think that's the correct way of putting it.
Yeah. So like more of a governance thing in the end.
Yeah, this is aimed to be like a paper which policymakers should be able to read, and well, I mean, they won't read the whole thing; they'll just read the executive summary and then actually have like a summary of the entire issue and like what sort of recommendations we support.
Okay, nice. Well, because as I said in my video, in my talk, did you see the talk that I gave, like on YouTube or and somewhere else?
Yes, I did. Yeah, I watched it.
Okay, complete.
Yeah, I watched it. I watched it 2 times. But I still found some parts hard to understand. But I think that's just because I lack background knowledge.
Well, you can surely ask about it right now in the comments, as I said. Well, so there were 2 parts. Like one was ethics of AI, the one that you're working in. And the mine one was ethics for AI. Whenever I'm talking about, and when the topics of governance came into, then mostly the point that I concluded in is that humans are very chaotic in nature, like way much more chaotic than machines. And therefore, work with a human group is very hard, and it is very incoherent. Humans are not very coherent with each other. Like nothing with humans is formalized properly, and humans themselves are not very well aligned within themselves. So for me, dealing with humans is way harder task than dealing with machines and making artificial wisdom and all the things, to formalizing wisdom for machines.
Yeah. I agree with everything you said about, I guess, human values being very difficult to formalize. And I think that's basically just a fundamental problem that I don't think alignment will be able to solve it. I think there'll be a different approach is needed, and maybe something like what you're saying about artificial wisdom is the right way, but some sort of different paradigm is needed.
Mm-hmm. One of the points of mine is also to work with artificial wisdom in an angle that it can not just solve machine alignment, but it also helps human to align within themselves also. Like that is the like best and far sight hope, but that seems very hard to achieve. You so basically you are working on the assumptions that consciousness can be made in machines, and you are not relying on any one specific subset of consciousness, or how will it be made. You are like just assuming that machines are conscious, like that thing.
We're assuming that machines can be conscious. Like the opposite of that is just to say that they can't be conscious, and you might believe that because you think that only living things can be conscious. But we're not going to go with that assumption because that just like closes the discussion from the beginning. So we're just remaining open to the possibility that they can be conscious
Okay.
and seeing what the potential consequences are there.
Okay, and currently they are not conscious.
Yeah, we don't think that they're currently conscious. And it seems that most people, most like experts in the field, like believe that.
And what is the definition of consciousness that you're working on?
So there's like two central concepts here. The first is consciousness, and that's the more specific, narrow version of that is phenomenal consciousness, and that's the capacity for subjective experience. Like you can taste things, you can see color, you can feel things. And then the other one that's closely related to this is sentience, and that means that you can have positive or negative affective experiences. In other words, you can feel pleasure or pain.
Basically, one is about the qualia stuff, and the other is about free will stuff. Is that what you're talking about?
Yeah, I think qualia is probably like the ability to like perceive qualia, or like to have qualia is like a good way of describing the first one.
Yeah, the second one is having the sense of positive or negative is about free will, like having a free will to decide what is positive and what is negative.
I don't think necessarily it really has to do with free will. I think like just like you can imagine like something which just feels pleasure and pain but just does not have any capacity for action. It lives in a very deterministic system or something.
Well, as soon as you jump into these realms of positive, negative, good, bad, then you'll have to deal with moral system that define good, bad, like moral objectivity, moral subjectivism, and all these things. And when you jump into this moral stuff, then you have to go a bit step back to metaethics. And in metaethics, you have to define how you are defining this good and bad. So how do you define pleasure itself? What is a pleasure? What is a pain? For some, what is a pleasure, to others that is a pain. So how can you actually define what is pleasure and pain? And in defining that pleasure and pain, the concept of free will comes to central. Like one must have a will to decide what is pain and what is suffering, what is pain and what is pleasure. So the second one seems with respect to free will, and these both are the fundamental problems in philosophy at this moment: free will and qualia.
For sure.
So the two definitions of consciousness that you're working on are based on two problems of philosophy.
Of course, yeah.
Okay. See, initially I also started working in the field of artificial consciousness only. Like after I came into the field of AI and I got to know that AI is very limited, intelligence is just one part of human body. Then I jumped to artificial consciousness to work for a while, and then after like making some papers or like doing things for around 1.5 years, I reached to the conclusion that there is no specific functionality of consciousness that we can directly know at this moment. Like we don't know what does consciousness actually do, what is the functional part of it. And therefore I thought to make consciousness or to put effort into making it without even knowing what it will give us, like working for something that whose output we are not even aware of, what output we will get out of making this thing, it seemed very irrelevant. And I thought to focus on the output that I want out of consciousness. What do I want out of consciousness? And when I thought about that, then it seemed like a big chunk of humans want alignment through consciousness. Like what is the purpose of consciousness? We want machines to be aligned to us using consciousness in some or other manner. We want consciousness for machines to have a theory of mind so that they can understand humans and align to us. We want machines to have consciousness so that they can have moral and ethical grounds, and they can have ethics. Like there is some functionality that we want out of consciousness. Like consciousness is like an instrumental goal, it's not a terminal goal. We don't want consciousness for consciousness. We want it so that we can get something. So I thought to directly focus on the terminal goal. What do we want out of consciousness? And that turned out to be obviously some alignment thing. And then I thought which aspects of consciousness is useful from a philosophical point of view for alignment. And when I drew this chart, then it came to that ethical systems. We want consciousness so that machines can have proper ethical systems like humans, and they can use that to align with us humans. And that's why directly switched from artificial consciousness to artificial wisdom, because we basically need wisdom. We basically want wisdom. We want that through consciousness. So consciousness like is a path, not the end. So yeah, that's why I jumped to wisdom instead of consciousness. While I was doing all this, then I came to this definition of panpsychism, and especially the variant of that Donald Hoffman talks about. Are you aware of panpsychism? I think you must.
Yeah, of course.
Yeah, so
Panpsychism just makes things. I think it's a super viable theory when it comes to AI consciousness, because it almost like trivializes the discussion. Because if everything is conscious in some way, then it's the mere fact that something has consciousness does not actually suffice for it to have moral status.
Exactly. So basically I chose that definition to define consciousness, that everything is consciousness. So instead of working on consciousness, we should work on free will, and we should work on qualia. Again, similar, it's like you are bunching them together and calling it consciousness, and okay, consciousness is something different, that everything is already conscious, but we need to work on these two aspects individually, not on a general bunch term. So that is just another word play and way to look at things, to make them more quantized and more easy to work with. But it does not matter. Again, in the angle that you're working, it is very abstracted and it is very much encapsulated. You don't really need a proper setup of consciousness for how you're looking at it, because it's like if machine is conscious, then what will do? So your angle and approach is very different. I probably get that. So but okay, even if you strip down to the definition of consciousness to machines having one of this definition, free will, because I think that is the one that concerns most with respect to your that confusion matrix that you designed, that machines have free will, human believe that machines have free will, and then we make the four columns out of that. So like looking at the whole problem from this angle would make more sense, because consciousness, again, the more vague term you use, the more people will have different opinions, because they're interpreting the whole problem in different ways. The way that some people perceive the word consciousness and work with it, and the way that other person perceive the word consciousness, it is totally different. So they are giving different answers because they understand the question differently. And I noticed this in the call as well. For however part I was awake, I noticed this, that people were giving their opinions and later on they were disagreeing to their opinions, because the opinions that they initially thought the definitions, they were finally realizing that okay, this is a different definition of consciousness we are working on. And I realized it was happening very frequently in the call as well. And from that only I came to this conclusion, that the people themselves are not actually aware of these words. These words like conscious is not as common word as like tea. People know what is tea, but people don't know what is consciousness. So when you use them, it will like, so if you're doing some kind of polling thing and all, then I don't think consciousness would be a good word. You should like specify it in the angle that you want to use. That I think is free will, basically free will and qualia. So if you talk about that in that way, and obviously talk about consciousness in terms of free will and qualia in your paper, then it will be very proper. It will be very concrete, that what you are specifically talking about. Like it is very hard to misinterpret free will compared to how hard it is to misinterpret consciousness. AI alignment itself does not seems to have a lot of options, or it's like I cannot find much of options. I don't know.
They have like more of a technical background.
In a way, yeah. Currently I'm doing information engineering, and before that also, like it's like I at this moment it's hard for me to differentiate which kind of background I have more, because I have technical background from a formal point of view, like from my courses from my college and all this stuff. But I feel like I have studied philosophy equally with respect to my own personal time and my own interest. So it is hard for me to differentiate, but when it comes to define concretely, then obviously I have a technical background. And but again, it has been a very hard struggle to get both of them on equal basis, given that one of things is pushed to me a lot, another is not. And I don't want the similar thing to happen in my masters as well, and that is the exact reason I'm planning to skip masters altogether and go for a PhD. Again, as I said, I have a lot of things to work on, but I don't know how to work on those things in the first place, the meta work thing. Till now, most of the time I did not had to even talk to people and work with people. I was just independently thinking my things, studying my papers and writing my things. but now it's like I have to work with people in organizations and collaborate and publish and all these things. So I'm learning all these things at this moment. Okay, so one of the fundamental things working with moral philosophy is what are the fundamental approaches that we have. So what I can understand at this moment is that we just have two approaches at this moment. One is deontology and one is consequentialism. So because all other seems to boil down to these things only, like there is nothing else that we can work on, the moral ethical systems. So basically, are you aware of what are some other ethical system except for these two?
So yeah, it's been a long time since I've done this, but my answers would be there would be two sorts of answers. The first would be virtue ethics. I do think that it's not reducible to either consequentialism or deontology. Um, I mean, also you could also say like approaches like egoism. I mean, that could potentially be considered as such an approach as well. And then there's also feminist care ethics, which yeah, I forget what the difference is, but there is like some sort of broader meta-ethical difference between the types of approaches that are such as like consequentialism and deontology, and even virtue ethics and care ethics are like an entire different like family of approaches to ethics.
Yeah.
So yeah.
But with respect to virtue ethics, like virtue ethics have a lot of similarity with deontological ethics in some ways. Like things are fixed, we have a certain way to work with. So how is virtue ethics fundamentally different from deontological ethics?
I mean, I see the project as virtue ethics as being a lot more flexible than deontology, because with deontology, you're working with the categorical maxim, imperative rather,
Imperative.
and you're trying to ensure that all of your actions never ever come into any sort of contradiction. And with virtue ethics, with the, first of all, there's like tons of different virtues that you can apply to any given situation, and it's part of being virtuous is knowing which virtue is the appropriate one to apply. You can apply different combinations of them to different degrees, and even within one virtue, there's like you can come up with conflicting courses of action for how you should apply that one virtue. Like, should I be if I think that honesty is the right virtue to apply in this particular situation, should I be honest about this, like A, or should I be honest about B? And so that can also be there's some indeterminacy there.
So basically, virtue is the maxim. Like we can use them equivalently. What is the difference between them? Like there can be a lot of maxims as well that we can use, and we can also define the maxims in the way that they can simulate virtue traits. My point is, it's like we can modify deontological ethics or maximum categorical imperative in a way that it can work as a virtue ethics, and we can modify virtue ethics in a way that it can work as deontological ways.
Yeah, I mean, I guess maybe you could. I think that virtue ethics is very closely related to some sort of naturalism, ethical naturalism, of like a view of what kind of living thing that you are. So Aristotle was concerned with the like I guess like the function of a human being. And so like this like teleological look at the kinds of things that people are. And I think that by contrast, deontology kind of sees like the rational agent as something which is like much more abstract. And it's something that the categorical imperative for a human being would just be the exact same for an alien or for an AI or whatever other sort of like creature.
So yeah, basically deontology is very human. Sorry, virtue ethics is very human centric, and deontology is very logic centric, rationality centric.
Reason, yeah, it's based on reason, much more based on reason.
If we define the logic centricness of deontology with respect to human, so basically humans can only know about human logical systems at this moment. The Nagel thing, what's like to be bad. So basically, deontological ethics that we have at this moment is virtue ethics because it is human centric, because we are humans and we can only think about human logic. So it's a different, like if some we can already make some intelligence that can come with their ethical systems, then their deontological ethical system would be machine centric. But at this moment, all the deontological ethics we have is human centric. So all deontological ethics are virtue ethics.
Yeah, you might be able to say that. I guess that would be a stretch, but I think you could also apply the same kind of exercise to reducing deontology into a form of consequentialism too. I think like I was some sort of I was having like a drink with a Kantian at a bar once, and I think he made a joke that deontology is like just like consequentialism, where you're just trying to maximize reason.
Yeah, I had the same confusion as well once. Yeah, okay. But the difference was the outcome does not change frequently, as in consequentialism. The action changes a lot. In deontology, the things are fixed, more fixed. It's like, this is how I see it, as a spectrum thing, because since I cannot find many a big difference, so how I see is at one end of the spectrum we have deontology, and one we have consequentialism, and rest things are distributed at on these things depending upon the intensity of which flavor do they want, like Linux distribution. So if something is flexible enough, but it is also like virtue ethics, it is flexible enough, but it is also rigid in some ways. So it will be like in center of these two things. And similarly, all the pragmatism, relativism, egoism, all things are distributed in this spectrum. And at the two extremes, and we have consequentialism and deontology.
What sort of insight you gain about them?
The use that I was thinking about is to design machines, or to design wisdom in a way that it does not generate any kind of moral system. Again, point of wisdom is it is an ethics generator. So basically it knows about the spectrum, so it can generate the ethics based upon this part of the spectrum that is useful for that situation, like that thing. So if it is aware about the whole spectrum, so like if in a case virtue ethics will fit better than deontology, so it can properly pick virtue ethics, and it will know how much of consequentialism we should mix and how much deontology we should mix to get a proper mixture of the ethical system that we want.
Oh, I see. Okay. But even in that case, I'm not sure if there's like a principled way to do that. I know that there is like some experimental psychology which shows that human beings intuitively use deontological judgments for people they're close to, like close kin, like friends and family. And when they're dealing with ethical situations about strangers, they default to more consequentialist views. And I'm not sure if like you can like actually provide a defense for that. I mean, that's just the way that I guess people naturally are inclined to think, but I'm not sure if that's like necessarily the best way. Because that leads to just like it literally is just a bias for people who are closer to you. I mean, maybe it's like fitness enhancing, but that's not a moral justification.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah, this is still very much rudimentary at this moment. I have not thought about it. But my point of working in this is this thing only, that if we have just two fundamental philosophical theories, as I said, consequentialism, deontology, then we can make this a spectrum thing. But if there exists something different, like you talked about this caring thing, so I'll read about it. If there's something third exists, then we'll have to extend our dimensions now. We'll have to go in 2D or something. We'll have to do some other things to properly make a spectrum. We'll have to make a sphere or circle out of it now. So that will become a different thing. What do you think about the sense of self or theory of mind kind of things with respect to machines? Because firstly, whenever I see these kind of things that is like leniently written in papers, self-supervised learning, self, they themselves, like in a lot of people's models are referred as a self, but they don't have anything close to self. Self-supervised learning is such a wrong word, because machines don't have a self to supervise themselves. They are using some techniques that are similar to self, but that is not self. But one of the points of working in my was something that has to do with realizations. I thought to talk about this when you talked about your problem of initially how you're defining consciousness. I don't know if I put this definition in the talk, that problems of Chinese room problem to logic is what philosophical zombie problem is to wisdom. So because philosophical zombie problem, if you work with panpsychism, it will get solved in a way. So that is a whole different angle. I will talk about that properly when I review your work. Then I will see where that fit properly. And how do you deal with things like self whenever you read a paper, whenever you do something like that? whenever you have any work to do with machines and the concept of self seems to be coming up, how do you deal with that? How do you define a self for machine?
Yeah. That's that's a pretty good question, and a pretty complicated question too. Um, as far as self goes, it's very important to, I guess, the idea of suffering, um, because you can have, I think you can have like machines that say have this affective valence. They're able to feel pleasure or pain, but they may not. They may lack a sense of self. And so, what would be happening in this case would be the machine would there would be experiences of pleasure and pain, but they would not be localized to a subject. So there would just be you would just say like, oh, there is pleasure and pain, not it is I'm feeling pleasure or pain. And so it's that's what would happen if there was no sense of self. And you might like maybe if we're thinking about like organoids, like perhaps organoids might be something like this, where there is no sense of self, but there is experiences of no, there are episodes of pleasure and pain. And I guess another thought that I have about that is that I think that selfhood is probably something which is very closely related in living things, at least, to the idea of an immune system, because the immune system is what like kind of protects the living thing from outside threats at a very basic level. Not even at the level of the agent, but something even more fundamental than that, something like at the biochemical level or molecular level. There's a self-other distinction. So I don't know too much about like immunology, but I think that is a good direction to research more.
Okay. Okay, but with respect to machines, when it comes like, okay, let's say if you're writing a paper, if you're reading a paper, and there's comes like model can self supervise itself, model can self generate the data. So what self do you understand there? What is the self there?
In that case, I wouldn't say that there is a self
Yeah,
there.
but
In
they're using the word
self-supervised
self.
learning,
It is annoying.
integration or like a continuity across time. So like I know that I'm like the same person now as I was like 5 seconds ago and like 1 day ago, 2 years ago, whatever. But in the case, so there's like a self for me that like extends through time. And for I guess a system that's doing like self-supervised learning, I don't think that it has this sort of sense of continuity towards time. And what was I going to say? I lost my train of thought. Sorry.
uh, the self that humans have is constant throughout time, but machine self is very much local in time, local in time
Right.
and
Yeah.
space.
So yeah, I was thinking that actually. So there's not really a sense of self of continuity through time, but I guess the way that it is able to still accomplish the task of learning, this self-supervised learning, is that it's using features of the environment which are consistent, that like stay the same. There's stability in the environment. It's very similar to like the way that human beings use like say pencil and paper to think out loud, or like a calculator. So that's like a stable part of the environment, and it forms a part of your cog system. Like at least this is what people who believe the extended mind thesis believe, that they're stable parts of the environment. You can use them as an extension of your cognition.
Yeah, because as you were talking about earlier with respect to immunologist angle, that where is the localization of the self that we're talking about? Because as this is one of my points for alignment using wisdom as well, that if the definition of self that one is using is just specified to their brain, then they will not even care about their hands and they will cut it out. But the definition of self that we generally use includes our body, so we will not cut that self. And if the definition of self includes our family, so we will not kill our family. And if the definition of self also starts to radiate out or have some effects on other human beings species wise, then we will take care of that species. So basically the definition of self defines the intensity of alignment. We generally align to ourself only using the wisdom that we have. So to align machines with human, we also need to define the self that we have, that they have should also have humans as part of them. Like the humans that have the definition of self that includes animals and environment, then they will not harm that environment because that is the self that they know. So this is one of the ways that alignment through ethics or wisdom can be useful. This is the third paper that I'm trying to do by working on the definition of self itself. Self itself, yeah. And and yeah, that way it can be there. But yeah, because the consciousness is one of the ways that we define ourselves, that is the most focused self that we generally find at. That, like when we go through some philosophical paradigms, that I am not this body, I'm not this thought, I'm not this senses, so who am I actually? I'm my consciousness. So that is the actual and fundamental self. But that is one of the functions that of consciousness that I can say of. And so if we radiate out that sense of consciousness to the general existence of everything, then it will be a it will be a win, because then we will align to everything. Panpsychism approach, especially the Donald Hoffman version.
But nice talking to you.
Yeah, you too. Have a good day. Thank you for the talk.
You too. Bye.
Bye.